Believe it or not, I had actually just today finished a video on Gail's recent appearance on Al Jazeera that some people had requested. But sure enough, yet another media appearance came up. She appeared on New England cable news, which really, Gail, is that what it's come to? But anyway, she appeared on New England cable news to further tell us why 50 Shades of Grey is bad for all of us and none of us should enjoy it. Anyway, so this is just going to be a hopefully quick video that I do while I'm drawing a bath, as you can see. And so in any event, let's take a look at what Gail has to say.
The book is 50 Shades of Grey. It's explicit, adult, erotic, and written from a woman's point of view. In other words, everything that Harry Potter is not. The one thing it has in common with Harry Potter, however, is success. As of last week, the 50 Shades series has outsold Potter on Amazon.com, which prompted Vanity Fair to declare the resurgence of the dirty book is here. But what would an expert on the effects of pornography say? I'm joined by Gail Dines, who's a professor of sociology and women's studies at Wheelock College, friend of mine. She's
okay, now where's your expert on pornopography?
I don't even know where to begin with this topic. There's so many questions, and I ought to be careful that we can't talk too openly about some of the answers. But you know, you're describing yourself as pro-sex and anti-porn. And so most people, I think, would say, well, you should be reading this book and enjoying it because people who like sex, especially women, are reading it and feeling liberated. Why is that wrong?
You need to learn how to talk on television!
Well, first, I love that you say pro-sex and anti-porn, because I argue that if you're going to be pro-sex, you have to be anti-porn. You can't be both, because pornography kind of really rips away any creativity and fun from sex and kind of turns it into a formulaic, boring, monotonous activity. And if you read 50 Shades of Grey, it's very similar.
Okay, Gail, what exactly is the creativity that is being had in sex that's not being reflected in porn? This idea that all porn is the same and it's this very generic, very formulaic thing is absolute bullshit. I defy you to well, you know, Gail wouldn't be able to do this, but I defy any person that's actually willing to go out and look for it to find anything in porn anything in their personal sexual interests that are not reflected in pornography, in the world of porn, and in the vast diversity of pornography and pornographic product that's out there. And, you know, if by some miracle you're able to find something that's not out there, then you know, that's not reflected in porn, then my simple response to you is, well, go out and start your own production company. Go out and, or see if you can find somebody that will create that kind of pornography, because I promise you, if there is a market for it, they will rush to fill that market. It is the polar opposite of this formulaic, industrialized thing that Gail has chalked it up to be.
And I mean, I read it, and first of all, it's so badly written, it's like almost unbearable to read.
Just from a literary perspective.
It's endless, and you know, it's basically tormenting you to read it. But let me say, what's interesting about this is the sexual sadism that gets sold as romance. So he's clearly a sexual sadist. I mean, if you look at all these signs.
Now right here, you mean the
Christian Grey, and he's in his late 20s, and she's in her early 20s. She's kind of really quite dumb. She's very, very boring, very banal, got nothing about her. And he's this very wealthy, successful, narcissistic, emotionally remote guy. And the story is that he meets her one day, for some reason falls in love with her, you couldn't imagine why, and then tries to get her to do S&M, sadomasochism. She doesn't want to do it.
Basically violent things.
It's really
in the
violent.
name of pleasure.
Yes, yeah. It's really violent. I mean, people are often shocked who haven't read it just how violent when I explain what's in it.
S&M, sadomasochism, comes generally in the wider context of BDSM, which stands for bondage discipline, dominant submissive, sadomasochism. And it can refer to acts of physical violence, or it can refer to simply the relationship that two people have with each other. That one is dominant and one is submissive, and it can be man dominating woman, woman dominating man, two men or two women dominating each other, a trans person dominating a partner. So to say that it's consists of these heinously violent acts is a fallacy. S&M is meant to consist of a consensual relationship. As I said in the previous video, the mantra is safe, sane, consensual. Now, one person pointed out there's also what's known as RAC, or risk-aware consensual kink, which means that you're doing something like, say, fire play, which couldn't possibly be done safely, but both parties involved are aware of the risk and are willing to take responsibility for it. And in that regard, in the example of fire play, as long as you don't burn down somebody else's house, then you have every right to get up to whatever you want to.
And she says no at first, and then he gets her to sign a contract. Now, the contract isn't just around what she'll do sexually. She has to sign a contract also about when she'll eat, what she'll eat, when she'll get herself waxed, what she'll wear. I mean, he wants to completely control her.
That sounds like a book about slavery. So,
yes.
So then the question is...
Slaves don't get to sign contracts. They don't get to formalize their agreements. How is that not obvious? How do you not understand that signing the contract is a recognition of the mutual consent of what's going on? There are people in BDSM relationships who like to give themselves over completely. Secretary was another movie that had a very similar theme to this. They like to just completely give themselves over to their partners. There are men who are doms, women who are dominatrixes, men and women who are slaves, who are submissives is the more appropriate term, who like to give themselves over completely. That's what they get off on. And the fact that they are drawing up a contract is a sign. It is not a sign of disdain. It is not a sign of disrespect. It is a mark of respect. It is saying we are going to formalize our agreement. I respect your boundaries enough to put them in writing and sign my name to it, that I'll respect them.
Who's buying the book and why?
Well, it looks, from what I can gather, women from 16 to 80. It's everywhere.
I have seen absolutely nothing to suggest that it is primarily 16 to 18-year-old women who are reading 50 Shades of Grey, and in the words of Christopher Hitchens, that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. As I'm sitting here editing this, it sounds as if she may have actually said 80. Even so, it still doesn't really provide any insight.
And what I am really, a lot of us feminists are thinking, why are women buying books that really are about, battery and violence? And I think for a lot of women, the romance, the so-called romance where he woos her and gives her this lavish lifestyle, I think that obfuscates and obscures the reality of the violence that's laying underneath.
In other words, if you do these horrible things and treat yourself like a slave in this sexually submissive way, you'll get a rich guy.
But remember, the sort of lie of the book is she eventually gets into it and actually is sexually aroused by it, so she begins to enjoy it.
What do you mean the lie of the book, Gail? We're talking about fictitious characters. If she starts to enjoy it, then she is actually enjoying it, because believe it or not, she is a fictitious character and she only exists as the author portrays her.
But I want to be clear that his wealth is part of the appeal that makes it feel romantic.
I would say it acts as an upmarket cleansing cream to the violence and the sadism that's actually in the book. I think if this was a poor guy living in the housing projects with no prospects, I don't think she would have found him that appealing in the first place.
Right, violence somehow becomes appealing if it comes attached to money. And in that...
Gail, you don't know how... You don't think she would find him appealing if it weren't for the money. You're talking about a fictitious character, Gail, a character who is only what the author makes her out to be. I mean, it's bad enough that you think you can speak on behalf of all women or of women you don't even know and that sort of thing, or know what's right for all women all the time. But honestly, Gail, I mean, you even think you know what's going on in the minds of the non-existent.
In that sense, I read the piece that you wrote for Counterpunch, and there was an interesting connection to both to this book and Pretty Woman, which a lot of people romanticize about this wonderful fairy tale. What's so bad about Pretty Woman, and how does it connect to this book?
Well, let me ask you, how many prostitutes do you think are living in marital harmony with their Johns at this moment?
I already know the answer.
And that's your problem. You already know the answer. You already know, without doing absolutely any research into that, how many prostitutes are married to their Johns, how many prostitutes are married to their clients. Once again, I brought this up in the last video on this, but it bears repeating. The reason that's the movie and that's the story is because that is different and exceptional and unusual, and that's why it's interesting. It's not interest. Well, I should hesitate to say that. I mean, obviously there were reality shows that just documented people's day-to-day lives, and that was apparently interesting for people too. But the reason that we get interested in these stories is because they're unusual, because they're not what normally happens. There's absolutely no reason. I can't think of anyone being interested in a story about a guy who goes and stands in line at a bank and makes a deposit and checks his balance and leaves and goes home. That wouldn't be even remotely interesting. What's interesting is when he's standing there and all of a sudden the guy behind him pulls out a gun and says, "This is a robbery, everybody," and so on and so forth. That's the exception. That's different. That's interesting. There's conflict there. There's something unusual happening. That's just one example. I mean, it's not interesting to, it would not be worth making a movie about somebody driving down the street and arriving at their destination. What's interesting is a movie about street racing or car theft or or something to that effect, or some, bringing back the bank robbery thing, like a diamond heist or a bank heist that involves getaway cars or something. I'm thinking of like the Italian Job or something. Something like this. These are the things that are interesting. These are the things that are unusual. These are the things that are noteworthy. So this idea that there's something wrong or something inherently wrong with a story if it portrays things as being different from how they are in reality is completely absurd.
Exactly. The whole story of Pretty Woman, the lie that a John will marry a prostitute and then take care of her lover. And what I actually say in that article, which is very interesting, it was an incredibly high-grossing movie. Why did they never make Pretty Woman #2? Why was there no sequel? Because what would her life look like married to a John? The truth is, can you imagine the first argument on the honeymoon, what he'd turn around and call her?
Well, they could have made another fake movie about what her life was like.
I don't think they could have pulled it off.
4 minutes, 34 seconds. Okay, not all successful movies have to have sequels made. I mean, my God, of course, there's the pure cynical Marxist logic. Well, it made money, so obviously they would try to make a sequel to it. Well, not necessarily. I mean, and first of all, this is the thing Gail talks about as if she knows exactly why there was no sequel ever made to Pretty Woman. Well, you need to put something behind that, Gail. If you could say there was no sequel, there were plans to make a sequel to Pretty Woman, here is the documented proof that there were plans to make a sequel to Pretty Woman, and they chose not to make it for this reason, therefore it supports my overall argument. That would be one thing. But you're speculating, one, on why they chose not to make a sequel to Pretty Woman, and two, that there was ever any question of making a sequel to Pretty Woman in the first place. I mean, you are literally you're touted as this expert at what? Your own opinion. I mean, that is all you are working off of here, Gail, is your own opinion. I would also like to add that not being able to think of a good idea for a sequel has never stopped anybody from making a sequel, as people who have seen S. Darko or American Psycho 2 will be happy to tell you.
Speaking of movies, I think this book is up to become some kind of movie, and I'm very anxious about that. The eroticization of violence seems ever present in all forms. Is it possible, because so many women who I would describe as middle-aged and perhaps inhibited around their sexuality, is it possible that there are things about this book that could be liberating for them, that they might be a little more open to all kinds of things that wouldn't necessarily be harmful? Could this book be liberating and harmful?
Okay, so let me say something. If you find a man and he gets off on giving you pain and controlling your behavior, my suggestion would be to run as far away as possible from him, because your life is not going to end up like 50 Shades of Grey, and that she ends up in a beautiful house. Let me tell you, these women who end up with sadists, they end up a few years later running for their life to battered women's shelters with missing teeth, cigarette burns all over their arm, and a couple of traumatized kids in tow. If a man comes anywhere near you who likes violence, I would say run as far as you can in the opposite direction.
So Gail can't tell the difference between someone who is living an S&M lifestyle and someone who is an abusive boyfriend or an abusive husband. Gail, the difference between S&M and abuse is that the abuse is not consensual. And your inability to understand that people can consent to live lifestyles that you don't agree with and you don't approve of is just exactly endemic of what is wrong with the insipid worldview that you advocate. That you just prance around telling everybody else that the way they choose to live is wrong, and that they apparently are they're apparently being abused even if they don't agree that they are, and that you can just go around making decisions for them and deciding what's best for them is sickening. Now, I want to bring it back to something that you said earlier, though. You said that this woman, the character in the book, wouldn't be interested in all of this stuff if it wasn't for his money, that the sexual sadism is appealing because of the money. Okay, well, Gail, how many in those battered wives and abused wives shelters and everything, how many of the women in those shelters are coming from highly affluent backgrounds versus the ones that are coming from coming from impoverished backgrounds? Because that's something you would need to offer, Gail. You need to present something that says not only that women are getting into abused situations, but also that women who go into affluent relationships with affluent men and lay out contracts about the nature of their sexual relationship are subsequently being abused and subsequently being mistreated. And so that Gail, is just the total impasse, the stubbornness, the bullheadedness on your part, that you can't see the difference between people choosing to live in an S&M relationship and people being abused. But that's not surprising at all. You can't tell the difference between people signing contracts to appear in pornography and being raped. And before you I need to now that I think of it, I should probably get that original clip that I responded to, because I don't think I have it up at present. I need to put that clip of her saying that back up. But in her appearance at Anti-Porn Week at We Like College, in that video, she says that women in porn experience rape on the set, and she doesn't care if you sign a million fucking contracts. That's rape. And she says this in support of a non-existent quote that she attributes to vaguely to porn stars that always say this. Anyway.
Probably wouldn't sell very well, even though it should, because it's a far bigger problem.
Yeah, I love the logic here. The logic that book, the book about actual spousal abuse, should sell better or ought to sell better, I guess, on some moral grounds. More people ought to buy it because it's a real problem. Well, guess what? People get to spend their money on what they want, and if they want to spend their money on things that entertain them rather than being constantly inundated with your cause, that's their business. It's kind of like the raving religious nut jobs who are completely intolerant of anything that doesn't have Jesus and the crucifix and all that stamped all over it. Guess what? There are people that aren't interested in living your worldview 24 hours a day. They actually want to enjoy themselves, and that is their right. But it's just that slave mentality, and I don't mean slave in some playful, kinky sense. I mean genuine slavery, that slave mentality of everyone needs to be burdened with the cause 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You must be burdened with the cause. Well, there's a reason that everyone thinks many people think that the Lisa Simpsons of the world are annoying fuss budgets. And it's not because the problems that they present aren't real problems. Certainly domestic violence is a problem. Certainly it's something that needs to be dealt with and something that needs to be observed. But guess what? It's okay to be enjoying your life. Even with suffering in the world, it's okay to be enjoying your life.
So if this is also titillating and it's all about the guy's pleasure and so forth, why aren't guys reading this book?
That's a really good question. From what I've read, some guys are buying it, but not anything like the women. I think the guys, I can tell you that the guys go to the pornography. They don't want the romance. The women have gone to 50 Shades of Grey for the romance, and a lot of them, I think, are skipping over the sex. Some enjoy it, but I think a lot of them are skipping over. The men don't want the romance; they want the porn. So
and they don't have to read the book to get the porn because it's in a.
And there's no romance in porn. Trust me.
I have provided tremendous examples in the past of romantic porn and that sort of thing. And the great one is the highly successful New Sensations romance series, which give that a look. I actually put up trailers, showed the trailers from it, the WorkSafe trailers for it in some of my videos, especially those deconstructing Pornland and that kind of thing. I think there's also some of it in the Wheeler Center, but just go look up Wheeler Center video. Just go look up the trailers for the new romance films, though, from the romance series from New Sensations. That is just one example of romance in porn. I mean, to say well, it's not there is complete ignorance. And I know what Gail and her supporters like to come back with is, no, we're not saying that it doesn't exist. We're saying that it's a niche market and it's not something that very many people are watching or listening to and that sort of thing. No, you said it doesn't exist. And if you say it doesn't exist, all I have to do is provide evidence of its existence to completely lay your point flat. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that and enjoy the rest of my bath. And quite frankly, this is why I got so sick of living in New England. Because, growing up, I had grown up my whole life in the South. And until I went away to college, I had never been out of the South. And in the South, I got so tired of just the rabid Fox News conservatism. I mean, it's just everywhere down here. And I got so sick of it. And I went up and I thought, everyone's saying, go to New England. It's very liberal. It's very open-minded. And when I got up there, I realized it was just the same dogmatic crap. What we see here, this little exchange, is the liberal left-wing equivalent of Fox News. Instead of a right-wing person telling us to repent because the world is going to hell in a handbasket, we have a left-wing person telling us to repent because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And to quote Ayn Rand, and no one came to tell you that your life belongs to you and that the good is to live it. Now, one last thing. Honestly, if you want to, a lot of people come up with a lot of questions about my point of view coming to these videos for the first time. I'm going to emphasize it here. I haven't been hitting you over the head with it throughout the video. But for God's sake, read my novel, Eros Empire. Read Eros Empire. You will see a complete, a story that is filled with passion, love, romance, intrigue, and everything that makes for a fascinating story, I think. You will find it all there, and you will find a story that is set in the porn industry. And it is set in the porn industry and deals with people who are in the porn industry, their lives, their daily lives, the kinds of things they encounter as porn performers. But more importantly, it deals with what life might be like if the antis of the left and the right got their way. What would it be like if they actually got their way? And that is the picture that is painted, and that is the picture that I think needs to be observed. And the thing is, I don't just constantly inundate you with terror about how bad things are getting or anything like that. I, in the course of my book, actually posit proactive solutions for how to make our lives better in a way that champions freedom rather than championing authoritarianism and hiding away from the big bad world. So if you want to read a book that actually has something proactive and productive and insightful to say about human sexuality, rather than the same old left-wing, right-wing authoritarian claptrap that we've been hearing for the last God knows how many generations, read Eros Empire. It is available through Bear Manor Fiction, wherever fine books are sold. And for God's sake, Gail, if you do, please don't do more than 3 appearances about 50 Shades of Grey, because at that point I'll be out of book title parodies. So anyway.